Let's take a look at a Photoshop technique that I've always called Breakout. And I first did something like this back in my darkroom days with a black and white print. The idea is that we use layers and a selection to allow one part of the image to appear to be breaking out from the picture boundaries onto a frame. The few examples I'm showing here were done some 25 years ago, but let's create one that's bang up to date with an image I shot just a month or two ago. I've edited the raw file through Adobe Camera Raw up to and including noise suppression, and of course I've opened it into Photoshop. I've already saved this as a completed image, so I'm working here on effectively a duplicate. So I don't think there's any need to make a duplicate within the layers on the right hand side, but I will remove the lock, and just by clicking it, because the first thing I need to decide is how much of the bird's beak is going to overspill onto the outside edge. Well, I'm going to pick up my rectangular marquee tool and I'm just going to make a bit of a guess at that. Now I'm going to use two keyboard shortcuts. Both of them can be found in the edit menu, because I'm going to cut what's within that selection, Control X. The checkerboard effect is the transparent base of the image, the canvas. But now I'm going to go to Control V, which is the equivalent of Edit Paste. Now you can see it's been put back in a different place. Let's move it back into position. If I go to my toolbox and select the Move tool, I can do that. And it'll usually snap into place, but I'm going to zoom in pretty tight here because I do need to make sure that I nudge it to the left. I'm going to use my cursor control keys to the left. Just going to nudge it into position so I've got a nice join between the two. I think it may be a good idea to turn off this bottom layer because we just need to concentrate on the beak. By holding the control key and the space bar together, you can see the Move tool changes to a zoom, and I can click and drag and then use the space bar to just move this into a convenient place. I think we've got to make a fairly tight selection around the outside edge of this beak, but maybe the magic wand will do that for us. You can see if I select it, from the options at the top of the screen, I've got the add one selection to another, so I can build it up. I've got the sample size set to point sample, and the tolerance is at the default 32. So I'm going to click into the area, and as you can see the little plus, I'm just going to click around here and see if I can get, well, you see that didn't work too well with the selection encroaching too much onto the beak. So in that scenario, I'm going to hit Control D to remove that. We could use a number of different options, but one of those, I think, let's try the magnetic lasso tool. Do you know, I don't think I've ever used this at all. I know roughly how it works, but let's see if it does the job. Now, it's not doing a bad job so far. Just need to go around the outer edge. Remember, of course, whatever selection we make, we can always adjust it after it's created. Now, if we look very carefully around here, we can see it's got a couple of deficiencies, hardly likely to do us a great deal of damage. The worst of them is the one in the center here. So what I want to do here is really to adjust this. So I'm going to go to my Remove from a Selection icon, select the polygonal lasso tool, zoom in just a little more, because what I want to do is to just say, no, remove that part there. I lost that a little bit there. I'll try that again. I'll get to that position and along the edge. And when I'm happy I've got anything I want joined into the selection, that's pretty good. If I go down here, it's not too bad, but here we could do with adding a little bit to the selection. So let's go back to the top left and add, start within, move to the edge. You can make your image much bigger here. Short steps I'm making here. I'm just clicking, click, 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 all around the edge where I think it's deficient. To be honest, that looks pretty good. I'm going to hit Control 0. Now we can see that the beak has been selected. But what I'd like to do is to actually soften the edge of that selection. I can do that by going to Select and Mask. We'll see this icon appear anytime we select a selection tool. When I click it, we get an option to view the selection we've made in a number of different ways. Now, most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, black and white suits me perfectly. That's why whenever I do a demonstration, it will almost always default here. The option I want here is the feather command. I only want 1 pixel, but you can see if I step this up, we do get a visual representation, and that's why the black and white is quite effective. But here I know that the feather needs to be minimal. Hardly noticeable as we view it here, but it's having an effect. And down at the bottom, I'm going to output back to the selection I've just made. So all I need to do now is copy that selection to a new layer. Control J will do that. Now I could drag this layer into the bin. Let's just keep it a little while longer, just in case we spot any problems later. But when I turn the base image on, now we can see we're getting somewhere. I think the first thing we need to do now is to decide the boundaries of the border that the beak is going to protrude into. Now, because we're working with layers here which have been separated from the canvas beneath, we can use the crop tool. I'm going to use that crop tool and I'm going to make sure I've got no values here. Let's clear those. What I'd like to do is just drag it out past the image. I'm just looking at how much of the beak is overspilling, and I'll move it up at the top as well and also at the bottom. I'm not sure how much I want, to be honest, so all I'm going to do is hit the Enter key to commit that change and Control 0 to fit the image on screen. It may be a good idea at this point, and I suppose I could have done it straight away. I could go to a 1-to-1 square, and let's have a look at how that works with this image. So as you can see here, I would need to have the same thickness on the left and the right, and that 1-to-1 looks to me to be about right, certainly good enough for what we're demonstrating here. So if I hit the tick, there's my image, and if I hit Control 0, it'll just fit nicely onto the screen. But of course we're using these 2 layers at the moment. Let's drop this one right at the bottom so it's out of sight, out of mind. So we've still got the beak, which is separate, but what I need to do now is to add a colour to my background or my frame. What we need to do next is to create a new blank layer sitting at the bottom of the layered stack here, and then we can flood that with colour, which is going to provide us with our border or frame. Now, I don't think I'm going to use this layer I used to cut the beak from, so just temporarily I'm going to turn it back on and select it. It does make the image look a bit odd just for a moment, but once we select this, what I'd like to do now is flood it with colour. Now, the choice of colour is yours. You can see I've got a charcoal colour selected from the colour picker. I'm going to hit Alt Backspace, which will flood that, and you can see the sort of colour that I've got. So we've got the opportunity here if we want to have that darker. Let me move away from that crop tool, which is a bit distracting, but what I can do here, I could select this layer, maybe my levels even. So while I'm viewing the image, I could decide exactly what the density of the frame is. and that's all going to be personal, I think. So when we go back to this image, what I'd like to do here is to put a thin line around the outer edge. And of course you can make your border size bigger or smaller to suit the project you're working on. But with this image, I want to add an edge effect. To do that, I'm going to go down to the effects at the bottom of the layers palette and choose stroke. Let me try to tuck this well away from what we're viewing. What I'm going to do here is to be a little bit heavy with this line, just so you can see it more clearly. So where I may choose something like 8 pixels in black, which is what you can see around the edge here, I'm going to push that up just for demo purposes. You'll also notice that the position of the line is on the inside of the image. If I click OK, you can see that gives us a little bit of a problem, because now part of that line is being seen on top of the beak that we cut off. So all we need to do is to make sure with this technique is the stroke line is applied on the outside. And when we do that, there we have the effect we're looking for. Of course, we can make fine-tuning of, or we can fine-tune the border. Looking at my border critically, I probably could do with a little more space in front of the animal rather than behind. They're all going to be personal choices, and it looks as though I'm a little bit slimmed down at the bottom. But if I wanted to make an adjustment here, it's not very hard to do, because if I pick up that crop tool again, and I want to just tweak this a little bit further one way or another. If I just want to drag it down and leave the sides, then of course I would need to clear the square crop that I set, so I can just drag it down a little bit. So if I wanted more at the bottom, I can do that. If I wanted more on the right, I could do that. It would mean I've got to reflood this with colour, but backspace will do that pretty quick. And of course, if we wish, we can add a little bit of texture to that background. Let me hit Ctrl-0 to fit it on screen. Let's go to, well, let me bring it up a little bigger first so you can see what I'm going to do. Filter, noise, add noise. Gaussian monochrome is my choice. There you can see about 3% just gives us a nice texture there. So it doesn't look quite so smooth and almost plastic looking. Save this as a Photoshop file, but of course at some stage we would go to the top right, flatten the image to finish, and for saving. Here I've sampled 2 colours from the image itself and created a harmonised and graduated border using the gradient tool in Photoshop. I'll see you next time.